Well, I guess the old saying must be true. Trouble does come in threes, so I guess it makes sense. Now, we're going to be taking kind of a long way around to the subject at hand, but trust me, this is all tied together and it's all going to make perfect sense. Martin Shkreli is out of prison early. You'll recall that he became known as Pharma Bro for taking a rare life-saving drug, Daraprim, and raising its price by 5,000%, from $13.50 per pill to over $750. But that's not what landed him in prison. He went to prison for defrauding investors. He had taken the money that he was bilking those pharmaceutical patients for, and he plowed that into a couple of hedge funds that he started. But of course, being a crook, he decided that if he could get away with ripping off seniors for their medicine, then hey, why not go for the gusto and rip off his investors as well? I can't really feel sorry for those investors, though. They knew he was a scumbag when they went in with him, and everyone ought to know by now there's no honor among thieves. So back in 2018, Shkreli got pinched for lying to investors about, among other things, how the hedge funds were managed, what they invested in, and how much money they had. The jury found that he had also secretly controlled a huge number of shares of the company as well. Shkreli was sentenced to a pathetic 7 years, and he's now out after only 4, of course. Under this sick system of white supremacy, some people are genetically immune from the law. But that doesn't matter. Who cares how many seniors and others were being ripped off and how many of them were having to make the horrible, painful choice between food or medicine every month or even every day because of this clown? So you lie to a bunch of millionaires about how much money you're splitting with them every month, you go to prison. But on the other hand, if you decide that you're going to illegally price gouge seniors for their medications, well, you might have to pay a fine, but even that's not guaranteed. And here you thought these white supremacists honored and cherished their elders. No, they don't. In fact, the racists who run this sick society, they don't even care about their own babies. And the reason that I start off with Martin Shkreli is just to make the point that for a lot of these white supremacists, this is nothing more than a sick game to them. Let's talk about man-made disasters, calamities brought on the society not because of nature, but because certain interested people want these things to happen. Now, unless you've been sleeping under a rock or you don't have infants, you've no doubt heard all about the baby formula shortage crisis that's going on right now. The reason for it is that the U.S. government decades ago made a choice that the WIC program would be used to give a monopoly to 3 or 4 companies when it came to producing baby formula in the United States. In fact, basically the United States doesn't allow foreign imported baby formula and uses large tariffs up to 18% as a means of protecting these US-based baby formula manufacturers from having to compete. As a result, just one manufacturer, Abbott Nutrition in Michigan, is pretty much the largest supplier of baby formula in the United States. In other words, the US government knowingly set up a little scheme with a single point of failure. Now, one of the siren songs that these white corporations sing in order to try to justify no government regulation is that the corporations will regulate themselves. After all, these are highly specified industries, and you can't expect some bureaucrat in D.C. to know anything about these businesses here. Why, you got to leave it to the professionals, leave it to the experts. This is their field of expertise. So they'll regulate themselves, because after all, they wouldn't do anything to harm their own profits, would they? Obviously, the country learned absolutely nothing from the Deepwater Horizon disaster. BP made the exact same lying claims about the petroleum industry, that they would make sure to keep all of their equipment in tip-top shape because, after all, they're making billions every month. They wouldn't endanger that just to save a few pennies. And then they refused to replace a $150,000 regulator, and they wound up wasting billions of dollars trying to clean up their own mess. Well, history repeated itself. Last September was when the first of the baby illnesses was reported in Minnesota due to allegedly tainted baby formula. FDA inspectors visited the Abbott Nutrition plant later in September, but other than standing water and unsanitary conditions, they claimed they didn't find any bacteria, which is what they were actually there to find, so they let the Abbott Nutrition plant stay open. Now, here's the kicker. Right after the FDA visited that Abbott plant and concluded that it was otherwise safe, A whistleblower had contacted the FDA in October of 2021 with allegations about unsafe conditions at the plant and other practices, including falsifying plant records and failing to properly test formula for contamination. And what did the FDA do? The FDA didn't even bother to interview the whistleblower until late December. And even after that, they still didn't move, because they understood their job is to rubber stamp the safety of that plant, to certify that there's nothing wrong so Abbott Nutrition can keep giving both political parties their campaign donations. Keep in mind, all this happened about 6 months ago. This wasn't during the Trump administration, this is during Jim Crow Joe Biden's regime, and it's his FDA who ignored that whistleblower. But that's okay, the FDA rubber stamp committee wasn't gone long because 3 more cases were reported, this time in Ohio and Texas. Now the FDA couldn't ignore it, so the FDA had to come back to the plant in January 2022, not because of the whistleblower who told them about this, but because at least 4 babies were sick and at least 2 of those babies had died. This time, forced to actually have to do their job, the FDA detected the bacteria Chronobacter. Back in March, the FDA released a preliminary report saying that they'd found traces of Chronobacter on several surfaces throughout the plant, though not in areas used to make the powder. Well, gee, makes me wonder how the world, the same FDA that didn't find anything in September, now some children die and all of a sudden they're finding stuff. Now, the talking point that both Abbott Nutrition and the FDA are using to cover their behinds is that the strain of bacteria that was found at the Abbott plant wasn't the same as the bacteria found in the babies who had gotten sick and died. That sounds and smells like spin to me. It reminds me of how when the 737 MAX planes started crashing, the FAA refused to ground those planes. They didn't do anything. Even when other countries like China grounded the 737 MAX, even in the face of the huge outcry and outrage of the American public, the FAA did nothing until people began canceling their flight reservations. When the public made it clear they'd rather pay the cancellation fees as opposed to get on those planes, then all of a sudden, the FAA suddenly said they would ground the plane. This after most other countries and the flying public refused to get on them. Now that happened on Trump's watch. And people called out the corruption, and rightly so, but as we keep telling you, both parties are flip sides of the same coin. The corporations are who the U.S. government listens to, not the people. The tail wags the dog. Fatalities be damned, even if they're babies. So after the FAA was forced to actually do a real sweep of the plant, and suddenly found the bacteria, then all of a sudden the Abbott Corporation issues a nationwide recall in February, and around mid-month the plant was finally shut down. Now, the government knew all about this shutdown a long time ago. They knew that this was coming. And in all this time, they've done absolutely nothing.
Well, Mika, the FDA began acting as soon as they knew that the plant was going to shut down. In fact, they started working on a couple things. One, increasing the manufacturing, working in partnership with companies, but also working with states to ensure that people who depend on the WIC program to get their baby formula, that they had flexibility to choose any brand and not be restricted. They were already taking action several months ago, and they've continued to ramp up the actions that they're taking, the FDA and the president as well.
The FDA is going to have to communicate better with the U.S. Department of Agriculture if something like this is going to happen. USDA was given about 2 weeks heads up before the plant closed.
Senator Stabenow says the FDA knew about this 2 weeks before the plant closed. However, the Surgeon General says they were taking action several months ago. Now that you know the whole story, you know the action that they were taking was mostly to show up at the plant and give an all clear and then go home. Nonetheless, by his own admission, the Surgeon General says that the government knew about this several months ago. So Senator Stabenow was inaccurate, but then again, she's one of the politicians who didn't do a damn thing about the Flint water crisis. And that affected and harmed God knows how many children in her state, but Senator Stabenow wasn't all riled up about it, because the children in Flint are black. But now that it's something that could affect her white grandchildren, she wants something to be done now. With baby formula becoming increasingly scarce on the shelves and the public becoming increasingly infuriated, Congress asked the FDA to explain why, if the whistle was blown on the unsanitary conditions at the Abbott Nutrition plant last year, the FDA basically hadn't done anything until a few weeks ago. And the FDA's man on the scene, Commissioner Robert Califf, said that he'd get back to Congress with the answers. I'm not exaggerating. That's what he actually said. They asked him why no one moved on the whistleblower report, and he gave them an IOU. And this talk about how Abbott Industries and the FDA didn't find a bacterial link between that plant and the babies who got sick and died, that sounds and smells like bullcrap. Sounds like the FDA and this Abbott company, they got their story straight. That whistleblower wasn't just whistling Dixie, you know. Obviously, they found something at that plant that led them to believe that it was getting into the baby formula supply, or they would never shut the plant down, albeit months later. And I'm sure you're probably wondering why this Califf clown is even the head of the FDA. Well, apparently he was the head of the FDA under Obama. He was only out of the office for 4 years when Trump was president, and when Biden got himself elected, I guess he figured, hey, if this guy was good enough for their first do-nothing administration, then he was good enough for a second. Now, as strange as this may sound, there's a part of this for me that feels like there's a political dimension to all this. I find it very interesting that this Abbott Nutrition plant is located in Michigan, which everyone knows is a right-wing extremist stronghold. And just a couple of months ago, you had all those yahoos in Michigan who were cheering on the Canadian blockade that those truckers were doing up there in Canada. It was right-wing interests who were funding that, right-wing interests who were putting money behind it. What was happening was the Republicans were trying to find a way to attack the U.S. economy indirectly. They knew that a trucker convoy blockade wouldn't work in the U.S. They tried it in D.C., tried it in L.A., and they didn't even get a chance to collect anywhere. So they decided that they would go ahead and block the bridges, the supply chain from the Canadian side, because they figured the Canadian government wouldn't react, which is right, they didn't for at least a few weeks. But even so, we've seen that there's also been an effort by trash like the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, no relation to the Abbott Nutrition plant, I'm told. He decided that he would start stopping all the semi-trucks coming into the U.S. from Mexico, allegedly to check and make sure that there were no illegal aliens in any of them. But everyone knows exactly what it is. It's Governor Abbott deciding that if they can't find a way to get the truckers to actually do a blockade, if they're not effective that way, then he would simply declare that the police, in this case, the Department of Public Safety, they would be the ones to stop all the vehicles. Now, of course, this backfired in his face, started doing a lot of damage to his state economically, so he's had to let up on that one. But the point that I'm trying to make is there's a lot of right-wing interests who would love to see some sort of chaos unleashed because they think it will benefit them politically. And in the state of Michigan, that's where you got some real hardliners. Those militias, plots to kidnap and kill the governor, a state legislature that nullified the 15th Amendment of the Constitution with their so-called emergency manager law. You got some real hardcore white supremacists up there. These guys had no problem trying to overthrow the government and see a number of their own friends and inbred pals get killed in the process. If these guys are so determined to seize power that they'll see themselves dead, then they could care less about seeing babies dead. By the way, this is the same kind of thing that happens in places like Venezuela, which the U.S. is now making nice with. The Blanco ruling class, who the U.S. was trying to reinstall into power, they did the same thing that you see a lot of these white companies doing up here, trying to slow down production or just shutting down altogether. It's a means of attempting to attack the people indirectly. You're trying to cause these quality of life crises in the hope that they'll get so angry with the government, who's not able to do anything about it, that they'll get them out of there and put somebody in who the white powers that be want in there. Now, I'm not saying that Joe Biden's for black people. He's not. This is nothing more than a power struggle between a couple of thugs about which one of them is going to be holding the whip. But what I am saying is, don't be surprised if it's found later on that this baby formula crisis wasn't exactly an accident after all. The Republican Party's political platform now is exclusively geared around children. You take a look at the phony hysteria about critical race theory. Take a look at the laws that they wrote regarding grooming in schools. Take a look at their banning of abortion. And then take a look at what's going on with this baby formula crisis. Everything about the Republican Party is geared around children. To them, that's the hot button that they're going to push. All their moral panic efforts and now these economic attacks, which is a man-made disaster, I think, an entirely engineered incident, all done to push the button of protect the children. But of course, the threat isn't what these Republicans say it is. The threat comes from them. Too many in the dominant society, especially those on the white right, have been trying to live in their own dream world. And while I don't expect that this incident's going to wake them up to the real one, I think it's a shame that so many other innocent people who don't deserve to be suffering will. But the white corporations and the white elite government they control, they're not worried at all. These corporate titans and these people like Debbie Stabenow and Joe Biden, they could care less. They can get formula for their infants from Canada, Britain, Switzerland, and you better believe there's not going to be any problems with that stuff clearing customs. They can get baby formula from any place they want it sourced. They don't worry about shortages, or people hoarding, or brawling with meth mothers and hood rats at the local Target, Kroger's, or Costco. The FDA commissioner said that there should be baby formula getting back on shelves in the next couple of days, but what he also made clear is, well, that's not going to be nationwide, and it's certainly not going to be in any sort of appreciable supply. That's just going to be when you might see a couple of cans appearing, which will, of course, immediately disappear the moment they show up. But as far as when the stockpiles are going to get back to normal levels, well, that's going to be a couple of months or so. And for that reason, so many people are going to be spending the next several weeks, if not the next few months, lying awake at night. But it won't be because their infant child refuses to go to sleep. Meanwhile, the people who caused this crisis, they will be sleeping like a baby. Good night, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Cloud Walker Z, George Montgomery, Deborah Gale, Latoya Holloway, and Aisha Sarpong. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.